Okay. Oh, great slideshow slide to start off on, by the way.
I wish I could see it. I'll see it in post.
You'll see it in post. It's Rukia in a maid outfit, so already off to a great start.
Well, well, I'm already happy, but
Okay. So, I would like to start with this is the inaugural Tom Talk, a series where I shout my brain garbage into the void,
and I help.
and Trevor helps. So, today we are going to be tackling a subject that is very near and dear to me and Trevor's hearts. Trevor's and I's hearts. Whatever grammatical structure makes that make sense. And we are going to be talking about basically how would we rewrite Bleach? Because probably we are not even remotely unique in the sense that we are dissatisfied with how Bleach turned out. But we feel like we can take because we can take what Kubo has and
Take the stone.
tweak it ever so slightly because there's a good setting underneath. There's a good setting underneath all of this, and we really see that. And we're kind of taking the benefit of hindsight. We're taking the benefit of hindsight and kind of rewriting using kind of Kubo's own words on certain things, and then inserting a very, very small amount of our own, and just trying to get a coherent structure out of all this. Anything you want
We're
to add, Trevor?
taking the scalpel. We're taking the scalpel to this until it's pretty.
Yeah, kind of. So, what are we going to be doing? The series that we are going to be doing this is going to be a series of, I would say, maybe 10 episodes, maybe 12. I'm not. I lost count on our basic rundown.
When we get to episode 35, we'll laugh at this episode.
Yeah, we'll we'll laugh at this episode, but it's going to be about 10 episodes worth of content where we take things one at a time. And we take a problem, a specific large scale problem with the series, and then tweak it until we reach a point where we feel that it uh, is literarily a word?
Eh,
It's a word to me, damn it. Until it makes literary sense.
literary.
And
Uh,
good.
we're going to try to focus more on themes, character development, and trying to remove as much superfluous content as possible. We're going
Cough,
to try to
cough.
cut a lot.
Blood war, cough, cough.
Yeah. We're going to try to tie up a lot of loose ends. We're going to redefine where necessary. And in this episode, what we're going to do to start with is actually define aspects of the series that are there in how in this way that they make the most sense. And if we need to tweak them, we will. We're going to look at how the world is actually structured because this is one of the elements that we kind of like more. There's a pretty solid setting here where we have the Soul Society, we have like a Mundo, et cetera, et cetera. We have some pretty unique concepts for characters and origins, and we're going to just try to put a pin in things so that we have the best ground to actually work off of. Because sometimes, especially with long running shonen writers, they kind of lose their minds. Cough, cough, Kishimoto.
Yeah.
And so we want to try to rein in some of these squirrelier concepts to start with.
Some of the squirrelier concepts to start with. And basically, for this episode, we're going to be taking the concepts as they exist, and we are going to put a firm definition on them. And then, if there needs to be tweaks, we will tweak them. And then these are the definitions for the things we'll be using from here on out. So let's just segue into our first topic, basic rundown of the world structure. Now, me and Trevor are going to be using a structure of the world, and I would say the grand overarching arrangement of things that really only was fully expounded upon in the extra material that Kubo released post series,
which is great.
which is great. So, first off, uh, I'm actually just gonna let pass this over to Trevor because he's the one that had this this bullet point in the notes, and I am assuming he has a talking point he wants to bring up first.
Well, basically, I just wanted to cover exactly how this Japanese Asgardian world works. So, when the world initially existed, and spoilers, but I don't care. The way the world initially was that there was the human world and there was Hueco Mundo. If you were a regular soul, your spirit material would be recycled and you would be reincarnated into a new person because there's a limited amount of soul energy in the world. But depending on if you were a bad person or if you experienced a serious amount of emotional anguish or some other problem, and your soul lingered around, you could be drawn into Hueco Mundo, in which case you become a hollow. Hueco Mundo being the infinite night, always night desert. It's desert hell, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, a handful of powerful individuals decided that they could profit off the reincarnation cycle and set themselves in a position of power for nigh eternity. These individuals would later become the four or so, I believe it's four, main royal households of the Soul Society. And to establish this, they basically got the most powerful person they could reach who was the most in tune with their soul. And this person became the Soul King. They basically died. They basically became a vegetable to serve as a mechanism by which souls could persist after death outside of Hueco Mundo. And with this, they created another subworld somewhere outside of Hueco Mundo and the living world, and this became the Soul Society. So when a person dies, instead of immediately being turned into spirit material, they would instead go to the Soul Society. Now, eventually, these people started breeding, and so now we have a population of souls that just exist. That they've only ever been souls, but there's still people who are coming into Soul Society from the human world. So you have a divide between the native-born people of Soul Society and the people who help run it, who live in the center of Soul Society in the Seirete, and they are the royals, they are the rich and powerful. And everyone on the outside they live in progressively worse ghettos. And these people exist only to give someone to rule over, and B, serve as fodder to maintain the delicate balance that allows this world to exist in the first place.
And then we have Hueco Mundo, which is more of the kind of natural version of Serite, in that it's always existed. It wasn't necessarily created, or if it was created so far back that even to ancient times it was ancient. And is exclusively ruled by what could be considered the natural end to hollows, which in of themselves are also a natural product. Uh, However, Due to kind of how hard it is to get to Hueco Mundo via normal means, it's kind of just lives off in its own little section of the universe where very little things can actually reach over there except for the beings with the power to reach it in the first place. So that
Basically,
good.
basically just hollows.
Just hollows, and even then, not even trivial hollows. Like you'd have to be pretty hot shit to be able to actually make it to Hueco Mundo.
And the hollows that live there are created usually in the human world and will eventually, after growing strong enough from eating other souls and or other hollows, make it to Hueco Mundo, where there they exist and grow stronger by cannibalizing,
Yeah.
and eventually, and it will get more into that in a bit.
Yeah, so actually we could use that as a segue. But first, let's just give a brief rundown. So we have three worlds that are in interplay here, and interplay even then is a kind of a strong word. We have the human world, or rather the normal world, which includes all of humanity and technically Wingbind, but we're not going to touch that right now. uh, so
First order business with rewrite. Wingbind is its own thing.
yeah, Wingbind is its own thing. We're just gonna cut that sucker out. It's allowed to exist. Second order, uh, all of humanity lives on Earth, and then they die on Earth. They become spirits, wandering spirits on Earth, if they cannot immediately cross over to the other side. And then where are they crossing over to? They are crossing over to the spirit world, which contains Serite and also the kind of societies that are built up within by the spirits that cross over. Then all the way over in this horrible Venn diagram, off in its own little corner, is Hueco Mundo, that is only inhabited by creatures, natural creatures of incredible power. So, what inhabits these worlds? Well, we have, in the human world, we have humans. And humans kind of begat spirits, or pluses, as the Bleach universe likes to call them. I forget if there's a reason that Kubo called them that, but I'm sure as hell not remembering it.
Well, it's just Spanish for like positive, I guess.
Well, yeah.
I almost wonder if they're just called pluses because hollows are called menos.
I guess.
Plus, and for our purposes, they're just souls.
Souls. So,
And for our purposes, and from what I can tell, anything that is not a soul is a hollow.
more or less.
Everything in the world fits under one of those two categories. Humans are technically souls. They're just not dead yet. Humans have souls within them, for example.
Humans have souls within them and can be robbed of those souls via mechanisms that Sarate has developed. However, I would assume it's in poor form to reap before their time. So there's that. Anyway, so we have souls. Souls can inhabit the human world, and then they cross over when, if they have no earthly qualms, they cross over to the spirit world, and then they are processed into that wonderful bureaucracy and go to Sarate, where they live out their spirit life until they are eventually reincarnated back on Earth.
Specifically, they go to the Rukongai, the Rukon district. It's basically a giant, vast, feudal Japanese ghetto that everyone lives in unless you don't.
Unless you're special. And even then, even if you are really, really special, there are people more special than you that they get to live within the walls.
Yes. The Rukon district is separated from the Seirete, the actual capital city where everyone important lives, by a massive do not cross line that's reinforced with a massive floating wall.
And a shield that only can be bypassed if you are super swole or if you're shot out of a cannon.
I mean, if you're shot out of a cannon, you're kind of swole by default.
Yeah, well.
It's silly.
Anyway, so who resides in Serite? Well, basically there's a word for this. The
The
military,
elite.
the elite,
The military.
the military overlords of this feudal society.
The way I understand it, it's everyone who works for the Seirete political system, being everyone in the four main families, the families of those who operate Central 46, which is the government body that makes decrees for the Soul King. You have the 13 court guard squads and their captain and their officers. If you are a member of the court guard squads, you automatically live in Seirete, and I assume also your immediate family.
Yeah. And more or less with the structure that they have right now is like I think it was 80 districts, yeah,
Probably.
in the Rukon districts.
There are probably as many districts as they need.
Well, I remember there was a specific number. There was a specific number that they had on the immediate outside of the wall. They were districts 1 through district 80. District 1 being the absolute hell zone worst possible one. And then district 80 is like the most pleasure palace, like lavish what utopia that you can possibly get outside the walls. Like everybody who's anybody who's anybody lives in District 80, and the immediate
Not sure
districts.
if that's right. You might have that backwards, but I'm not sure.
I swear, it was, the lower you went, it was bad. I can't remember, but either or. If I'm wrong, flip the numbers.
Report the conversation.
But yeah, so and then all this just kind of feeds into Serite and the people that run it, and kind of the ultimate benefit funnels upwards, and then that's where we end up. So then we have the actual hollows themselves.
Everything. Yes.
So everything that is not a soul is a hollow.
Is a hollow.
And then we have the subcategories of those, but ultimately they're all the same thing, just on different power levels. So
you have your regular rank and file hollows. If you get enough of them compacted together, they become a Menos, and depending on if there was a particularly dominant personality or not, those Menoses can exist in one of three forms. The Menos can be a Menos Grande, which is a emotionless, mindless mass of power. These are the tall boys.
Yeah.
If they do have some kind of dominant personality inside of them, they jump to an adhuchas. A lot of Spanish here, folks. We're both very white. Give us our best. We're trying. You have an adhuchas, which is typically more. They resemble a regular hollow a little bit more, but maybe a little more specialized.
Mm-hmm.
And if an adhuchas needs to constantly eat more hollows to continue to grow powerful, lest it revert back into being a Menos Grande. And in very incredibly rare circumstances, a Menos or an adhuchas can eat enough hollows or enough souls to become a Vasto Lorde, which freezes their development. They no longer have any threat of reverting backwards. And to my knowledge, every single Vasto Lorde we have ever seen is humanoid.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about right. A point to point out is an ahuchas usually is animal on appearance. There are exceptions, but usually some sort of very bony, very white animal-like thing.
Grimjow, for example, was a puma.
Yeah. And
thing.
Various other things. But yeah. And then the Vasalorde are just usually human. It follows the Bleach thing of the larger it is, while impressive, is usually the weakest of any given class. You want to be as small as possible in Bleach Land.
Because of something that we should have included in our notes. I just remembered now, and we'll get to it. But because of how spirit energy and spirit pressure works, it is almost always better to be small.
Because
We'll
you got that energy conservation.
Not only that, but well, I guess we might as well broach it now because we brought it up. There's a common misunderstanding of how the typical shonen energy of Bleach works. Every spirit has spirit energy, which they can exhaust. Most don't without basically completely exhausting their bodies first. But this is a natural kind of radiation from their bodies, from their soul bodies. And this is how they power any of their techniques. This works for both souls and for Menos. But the more spirit energy you have because of your size, only so much spirit energy can be radiated out of your body at any given time. So the smaller you are and the bigger your spirit energy is, the more pressure that it's under. So spiritual pressure, while it's the term that's usually thrown around, it isn't actually the energy, it's just the effect of the energy.
So in layman's terms, it's the difference between a water bucket and a fire hose.
Yes.
Because a bucket is larger and it can chuck a lot of water, but a fire hose is far more concentrated, even though it's smaller.
I believe they actually used a very similar metaphor in canon when describing the concept to Ichigo, that Ichigo is a reservoir of spirit energy so large that it's actually just outpacing his ability to shoot it out himself.
Lewd.
Which gives him a very large spirit pressure. Spirit pressure can be felt to soul sensitives. This is why everyone kind of explodes into goo whenever Kenpachi walks into a room, because he has a very large amount of spirit energy going through a average sized body, which allows for a massive amount of pressure.
So, again, to put it in layman's terms, Ichigo, while he is an utter dumbass in terms of actually applying his spiritual pressure, it's just that he has such a vast wealth of spiritual energy that he just kind of gets large spirit pressure just by virtue.
Yeah. Another thing that we can talk about is, this isn't ever stated, but it's my headcanon that I just came up with.
Good.
And that the reason that two beings with similar spirit pressures don't really get hindered by each other's effects is because your pressure, like say Byakuya was fighting Kenpachi. They have comparable spirit pressures. Maybe Kenpachi's is a little bigger. But because Byakuya's pressure is pushing back on Kenpachi's, it's kind of neutralizing the force.
I think you said Kenpachi twice.
But
the point
I meant to say Byakuya.
Point still stands.
Yeah, the two energies cancels out. If one of them is larger, then that will be felt.
The overflow will be felt, but like not the actual full force of it.
Yeah. So like if Cone were to fight Kenpachi, Cone would be exploded into a goo.
Mm-hmm.
But if Ichigo and Kenpachi fight, since they have comparable spirit pressures, they don't really feel each other's presence that way.
Yeah. And another point to bring up is during the very first chapter, I believe, Rukia could feel Ichigo's pressure, but only as she looked for it, because she was so utterly surrounded by it that she just kind of got lost in it.
Yeah. She knew there was an immense there was an immense force nearby. She just couldn't locate it.
Yeah.
So it's not like with to compare to Naruto. It's not like with sensing chakra where I look in that direction. Oh, I see immense power. It's just kind of a blanketing effect over the nearby area, depending on how big your spirit pressure is.
Yeah.
And something that a trained captain can do is that they can actually suppress it. They can just stop themselves from radiating spirit pressure and thus spirit energy, and thus they don't have a pressure unless they want to.
Right. And let's segue into the next topic for the night. Sub races. How do these various concepts that we're throwing around, how does it actually apply to any of the actual beings that inhabit it, and what different beings inhabit this world of ours? So we actually broached upon the various types of hollows and whatnot beforehand. So we got the
-1.
-1. Uh, so we got the hollows, dick ass hollows themselves. Now these can actually get really powerful, and while still just being hollows, but it's really dependent on kind of the being that they were before they died, plus whatever they're eating right now, so on and so forth. Many factors, but you can get some fish bones hollows, and then you get some grand fisher hollows, which are stupid powerful while still being dick ass hollows.
Yeah, just to be sure, I'm pretty sure they never actually stated that Grand Fisher was anything more than just a hollow.
Yeah,
Strong.
He was a regular dick ass hollow. He was just really strong for what he was.
Yeah.
So then we got those. Then if they eat enough and they don't have a dominant personality right away, they progress to a Minos Grand, skyscraper sized, much larger. The added detriment of they're so large, therefore they have really weak spiritual pressure compared to what they should be putting out. So they just kind of lack a lot of punch to any of their attacks, despite them being skyscraper sized.
Most of their power just comes from their sheer size.
Yeah, and the fact that
which
they
is
could,
why Minos Grande is really not a threat to any Soul Reaper or other of significant merit.
Anybody worth their salt could take on a Minos because A, they're stupid, and
They're big.
B, like they're all power but no actual technique. Then we have the next step up, the Huchas, which is they actually progress to the next stage. They are much smaller, about human size to a little larger. And then if they eat enough and can actually sustain themselves all the way through, we get the Vasalores, and then that's the top of the pile. They can stop now. They're all human in appearance, and they are all incredibly powerful. All of them, I think, are captain class or like a little below in terms of power.
We actually did get a clarification on this in that, in general, Menos Grande are worse than captains and seated officers, and Adhuchas is typically around as powerful as a captain, if not a little weaker or a little stronger.
Right.
And Vassal Lordes kind of blanketly are stronger. Because actually, what I think it was Kyoraku who said it, that if 10 Vasto Lordes existed and they gathered them all up into a group, they could probably trample over Soul Society with ease.
So let's examine a flip side of all this terminology that we're throwing around. And what can we do to hollows to make them a little bit more?
I'm assuming this is our lead into our own cars.
Yes. I was trying to motion to you, but you weren't picking it up.
Sorry, I so this would kind of build off of Soul Reapers, because probably as Kubo was writing, he's probably thinking of how do I write a reverse Soul Reaper, but in lore it's the other way around. So we'll start with Arankars. And a Rancor is a hollow, usually a Menos, who decides or forcibly forgoes their mask. A Rancor being Spanish for to tear off. They remove part of or most of their mask, and they seal a large amount of their power into a weapon. This results in turning into a humanoid-ish being that if they weren't already sentient, they become sentient. So like a Menos Grande, for example. We've only ever seen one. It was Aroniero Aronieri, and upon becoming in a wrong car, he became intelligent.
Yeah. And essentially, what Arankar are, despite the in addition to what we just said, is they become very, very Soul Reaper like in form and function. I guess not so much function because there's some extra stuff tacked onto Soul Reapers, but you know what I mean. They are a humanoid. They have a sword, and then they express the vast majority of their power through that sword. Not even sword, weapon.
Weapon. Most of them, I feel, because of Aizen's influence, take on swords because most Arankars are believed to have been artificially manufactured by Aizen.
It works
But
though.
stronger Arankar. But it works. But like Ulquiorra, he just has a katana, probably because that's just how Aizen made him. Actually, I think Ulquiorra became an Arankar on his own, so he's not artificial. He just decided to have a katana.
Yeah, there's a couple. Okay, so there is a couple of natural Arankar who existed before Aizen ever even saw Hueco Mundo. And let's see, we had Ukiora. Was Haribo one? I believe she was.
No,
No?
it specifically was not.
Oh wow.
I don't know if it was in the manga. It probably was, but we see a flashback scene of Polybell existing with her fracciones, who are all at Hucha level, and she was kind of supplying for them. And she is actually just a hollow, a Vastalorde hollow. But after being attacked by an Arankar that Aizen had made to kind of he was making a situation in which Hollybell would become loyal to him. She was not aware of this, obviously.
Of course.
She is overwhelmed by this Arankar, who was a hammerhead shark dude. And Aizen defeats him. Hollybell is, of course, grateful, and he says, well, you can also be stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And so she is made into an Arankar.
Point still stands. Point still stands.
Same is true
There were a Rankar before. There could be a Rankar before, and it's a process that they can undertake if they find out how to do it, and then do it. But the vast majority of the ones that we saw in the series were Aizen made.
Using the Hogyoku.
Yeah, because magic.
Magic.
Anyway, so that's more or less like we also there's also like some sub stuff to do with because you mentioned it earlier. What's a fraction?
A fraction is actually a concept created by Aizen. When Aizen gathered up all of his Arankar, he kind of made a system of organization, probably for himself and also to motivate those in the ranks. Every Arankar is numbered in order of the time they became Arankars under Aizen's command. So Arankar number 11 would be the first, technically, but I think it's weird.
Yeah.
I think Grimjaw was like 15 before he became an. And then he's of all the Arankars he had, he said the top 10. Actually, I don't even think it's the top 10. I think it's the top 9. The top 9, all the single digits are reserved for the top 9 strongest Arankar, who will be my inner circle.
Yeah.
They are in charge. Every Arrancar has a right to a fracciones. They have a right to no fracciones, or they have a right to as many fracciones as they want.
Yeah.
Like Ulquiorra takes on none. Baragon has a cavalcade of like 8.
Yeah.
I said Tesla, he's the Fraccione. Noitora has 1 Tesla.
Mhm.
A Fraccione is just an Arrancar who works directly under an Espada, rather than just being a rank and file.
Yeah, so the top 10 were the Espada.
Yes.
Now,
9,
not,
9, Yami's dumb.
Yami's dumb.
He's the 10th zeroth, so who cares?
He's the 10-0th. Fuck him and all of his bullshit.
Spoiler alert, we're cutting. He's dumb.
Yeah, he goes back into the pit. And if I'm actually suddenly remembering a term that might actually explain the Arrancar that are not them, and I believe it was the numeros.
Nope, the numeros are the rank and file. They are everyone else.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, they are the numeros. Everyone 11 and up. And there is a third subgroup within the army where if you were previously an Espada, but have since been replaced, demoted, or otherwise, you gain a 3-digit number. You become a 100 plus whatever your Espada number was. So I think that Dordoni, the heavily Hispanic one, I'm pretty sure he was the 5th Espada, and he became the 105th Espada.
Yeah.
As long as I'm remembering what his number was, but it's one of those.
Yeah.
And they are the Privaron Espada.
Yeah. Makes sense. So that is the Arrancar. Basically, very, very Soul Reaper-like hollows that kind of express their powers in the same way. But what does that actually mean? Because we need to also define some terms and go through some shit on the Soul Reaper side of things. Because Soul Reapers are also kind of hollow-like in their form and function as well, but they don't like to talk about it because it's okay when they do it.
What we kind of learn very late on is that Arrancars were something that existed, and then early members of the Soul Society saw that and said, "Why don't we do that?"
Yeah. So basically, there was a dude, a really cool dude, whose name is really escaping me right now, but I remember he had an O.
Yes.
It was like O Maeda or something like that? Or am I misremembering?
Anyway,
He was a dude.
created the concept of the Zampacto, which he stole it from the Arrancars.
Yeah. So basically, what they are is what a Zanpakuto is. Because if you have any knowledge of this series, you know what a Zanpakuto is. It's a sword. Okay, but what is that actually? Well, it's not really a sword. It's a hollow. They're swinging around what is essentially hollows that this asshole in the 0th division, we'll get to that, created, and they are essentially just kind of blank, very, very, very hollow-like creatures, except they have no personality of their own. They just kind of sit in a room waiting for a master to control them, and then they are spiritually forged into a sword, and then given to any old rookie who feels like it. So, what does that actually mean? Well, Soul Reapers are actually kind of very bad at expressing their power outside of other systems such as Keto, or magic, or anything like that. They really can't do much. And yet here are these Arrancar swinging around swords and leveling city blocks. So how do we get in on that? Even though we have people that have like nigh infinite wells of spiritual pressure and spiritual energy, but they can't do what they're doing. So how do we do that? So they're like, okay, we'll take what the Arankar have, or what Hollows have, and then use it for us. But the thing is, we don't have masks like the Hollows have, so we can't create our own swords and stuff. So we'll just take a Hollow, wipe it clean, and then we'll use that. And then that usually takes the form of a sword. Probably due to out of convenience sake, or whatever the hell that dude was thinking at the time when he created these things. And they give him to a fresh rookie in the Soul Academy, and then they are to spend years upon years upon years forming a bond with this blank ass nothing, and then they imprint part of their soul into that, and then you get the really cool Zanpakuto that we actually see. And kind of contrary to what it really seems like, most Zanpakuto don't have always released Shikai. Most of them just keep their blank ass sword appearance that they start with, and it's actually rare that we get something like Kenpachi's or Ichigo's or any of the other ones that have the released Shikai.
Though I'm willing to suspect that that was not actually a thing, and then Kubo, like Kubo started it being a thing, but then it kind of just got forgotten about. So the only time we ever see it is with Ichigo and Kenpachi, and as we learn, it was a lie with Kenpachi.
It was a lie with Kenpachi.
His sword was not an eternal release. That's just how it looked like.
Yeah, it's weird. So then they train with these swords, imprint their soul on it, and then they get access to the weird powers that all these Arankar are swinging around, because they finally have access to this technology of being able to express their inner spiritual energy via a weapon. And they kind of took that from Hollows, and then they use it to exterminate Hollows. So they can feed their ever-growing system of a military state.
I feel like this is a good time to segue into this part of the discussion, and then we'll come back to sub races since we kind of veered off. A lot of times, like the meme of Ichigo is every race. Ichigo is a Soul Reaper. Ichigo is a human. Ichigo is a Fullbringer and a Quincy and a Hollow. Except there's only two races. There's pluses, there are minuses. Menos.
Yeah.
Cute Spanish word. There's Hollows and there's Souls. Soul Reaper is not a race. Follow up. It's not a sub-race. To say that Soul Reaper is a race is like saying wrestler is John Cena's race.
I mean, that's what's written on his character sheet, and I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway.
A Soul Reaper is a soul that has undergone training, has bonded with an Osawachi, and has at least some decent amount of spirit energy such that they weren't immediately kicked out of the academy. That's every Soul Reaper. They are a soul.
Oh, and to clarify, an Osawachi is the blank Hollows I was talking about earlier.
Yes, and that an Osawachi becomes a Zanpakuto.
Yeah.
So Soul Reaper, not a race. Not a sub-race either. Well, what is a sub-race? But what is a sub-race are Quincy's and Fullbringers.
So Quincy's are actually let's put them on the back burner really quick. Fullbringers are people who what was that, as you put it earlier, survived a hollow attack?
Yes. So a Fullbringer is a soul. It is a plus that has experienced a hollow-based trauma. Chad fits this category, or Hime fits this category. Ichigo technically fits this category. So we'll get to Ichigo next episode, I promise.
Yeah, we'll get. But yeah, so they experience a trauma, and then through that trauma with hollows, they are actually able to kind of do the same kind of thing that we've been talking about so far, and impart their personality and energy onto a weapon. For Fullbringer specifically, it's usually an item that then can manifest
And
as a
I
weapon.
right. So for probably one of my favorite ones, whose name now escapes me because of course it is.
Which
Ti-
item?
Butthole face, time man,
Oh, a
insert
watch.
into past. Tsukushima,
Oh,
Tsukushima.
oh, oh. I thought you were talking about the stopwatch dude, or the pocket watch dude,
No,
whatever.
I don't remember his name.
Yeah,
Anyway,
Tsukishima.
Tsukushima.
Tsukishima. Yeah.
Tsukushima, his full bring is a bookmark, and it becomes his full bring, the Book of the End, which allows him to insert himself into your past. Fullbringers, unlike Hollows and double, unlike Soul Reaper, or they're actually kind of more like Soul Reapers. It's a gradient.
Yeah.
Rather than gaining an expression of power, though they can become powerful, they gain an effect. They have a power. They're stands. That's what they are.
Yeah. Their stands
So,
linked to an item, and then they get to do stand battles with them.
yep. For Chad, it's his actual just his arms, which is my favorite one. Very
I
cool.
believe specifically it was his skin, but it only really manifested on his arms. But yeah,
Yeah. For Orihime, it is her.
hairpins.
It is her hairpins because it was significant to her. That's the other thing is it's not a random item. It's usually an item that is important to you.
It's an item that it has great significance to you. They kind of hand waved this with Ichigo and just kind of made it of his substitute Spirit Reaper badge, which is
Which was
dumb.
another plot. It was the most nothing plot element in the series.
Is the most nothing plot element because I don't think I've ever seen him happy to be a substitute Spirit Reaper even once.
Well, I don't think I've ever seen Ichigo being happy. So like,
Okay, fair. But I'm just saying, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that guy has ever gotten psyched of like, oh, cool, I get to go be a substitute Spirit Reaper now.
it's I like Ichigo approaches everything in his life with the same level of annoyance I approach a customer who says I did something wrong with their receipt.
Oh god.
Begrudging annoyance.
Um, but yeah, again, so Fullbringers are still very much pluses, but with just a tiny little bit of hollow in them,
They're
and then
they're just really well equipped soul reapers.
yeah,
Or they're really well equipped souls.
yeah,
They've gotten a modicum of training, probably in Keto, in Flash Step, and other. And they have a Asawachi, which was a hollow, but it's kind of become just a nebulous thing. I think by the time it's become a fully fledged Zanpakuto, it's pretty much been scrubbed clean of any hollow aspects, as otherwise it wouldn't make sense why you can steal their Bankai, Quincy's,
yeah.
Kubo.
Kubo.
Later.
But
Later.
yeah, so um, we have one more race, and that is and by race I mean sub race. Uh, we have the Quincy's, and they're kind of in a very nebulous zone. So what they are is they are made by the God King Yawak, who is what is essentially the quintessential Quincy. And what he is, I think we'll get into more in depth later, but he is essentially a part of or actually, I believe it was described as a son of the Soul King, but yeah.
Yes.
He's the son of the Soul King, which doesn't make sense, but we'll get into that later. And basically, he is a being of incredible power, and he has a very, very special ability that he can use to manifest other abilities. So what he does is that he is at the beginning of his life, he was entirely powerless. He had no ability to see, speak, or hear. He had no sense of touch. He was just this really rank ass baby. But when people
He was a
touch the
torso
baby,
with a brain.
yeah, it was a torso with a brainstem. When people touched the baby, they were miraculously healed, like fucking Jesus and Lazarus level healed, and it was great. However, this baby never aged at that point. So when the people who touched the baby and were healed in some miraculous way, they gained sight and eyes that they had lost. They gained back legs that they had lost or were lame and crippled. Uh, or they gained voice in vocal cords that were broken beyond repair, so on and so forth. When they died, they transferred their powers back to the baby, who suddenly could see, speak, hear, so on and so forth. And this child grew and collected other people's senses and abilities. And it was eventually discovered that he could give powers. That's his power, is he gives other people powers. The thing is he can take back those powers, and then he cannot improve them on his own. But he gets them as they were when when the person who he gave them got them back. So he would give these people abilities, and then because he had control now, because he's this nondescript adult now, way back in his past, he would let these people live, and they would have families, and then the kids of the people would have those abilities, but probably a little bit watered down ever so slightly, and then they would create these long lineages, and all of these people collectively are what we call Quincy's. They are people with direct lines all the way back to Yawok and the original people that he gave abilities to. So essentially, they are still very much pluses. They're still very much human in appearance and ability, except they have something. They have an ability, usually in the form of creating a spirit weapon, usually a ranged weapon such as a bow, and they have the good.
Their true power is the ability to control the flow of reishi.
Yeah, that's their true power, and then they can do wicked shit with it.
Which is spirit. Sorry. Yeah,
so then that is their true power, and then anybody who can do that is a Quincy. But at the end of the day, they are still very much just humans. And then Yawok can perform something called an Oshwallen, which is just a purging of all living Quincy's, and if they aren't tough stuff, they get killed. If they are tough stuff, they live, proving their worth to him, and he draws back all those souls, gains their power, and is stronger than ever. And now, I think that's more or less it.
An additional note on Quincy's is that the reason that they are a problem asterisk in the series is because, unlike Soul Reapers, who recycle hollows into being pluses, and thus basically Soul Society's job to continue this system that they engineered is allow some people to become hollows, rescue others. This maintains a balance between Hueco Mundo and Soul Society and allows Soul Society to exist.
Yeah.
If this balance would be to be horrendously thrown out of the water, Soul Society would collapse and there would be impossible collateral damage on the human world.
Yeah. Because what they more or less did was make the human world dependent on Serite, and so on and so forth. And basically, they kept a controlled population of hollows going on at any given time.
Now, the problem with Quincy's is that, unlike Soul Reapers, when a Soul Reaper kills a hollow, they just become a soul. They return to the Soul Society. When a Quincy kills a hollow, it is destroyed. It is reverted back into pure reishi pure spirit particles the way it used to work before Soul Society. But this means that the balance isn't working. If a hollow isn't turning into a soul, then that soul's gone. It's not in the. They've taken energy out of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
And so to keep up, the Soul Society has to kill random people in Soul Society, probably utterly rendering them down to reishi to keep up, that to keep the status quo.
And then we do have one more kind of sub race on the docket, and this is one that kind of links back to earlier, and these are the Vizards, or the Vizards, however you want to pronounce that. I think it's
Another Spanish word, and I don't remember what it is.
Technically it means mask.
Makes sense.
Yeah, say visor.
Romance languages. All right.
Don't you love them? Anyway, so it's kind of a give and take kind of deal between hollows and soul reapers, and by that I mostly mean just a take. Where the hollows would have something and they would gain unimaginable power doing it, and then the soul reapers would be like, we want that. So that happened with the Zanpakuto, and then it again happened with the Arrancar, where they have these masks that they take off of themselves, and then they turn them into weapons and gain unimaginable power doing so. Well, again, the Soul Reapers, and this one's a bit more specific to Aizen.
Yeah,
because he was
natural.
good.
Vizards are not natural. They've been artificially engineered.
Yeah, so this one's more specific to Aizen. He's always looking for a way to create an edge over his opponents, and I believe this was probably his way of creating artificial Arrancar long before he just had enough power to walk into Hueco Mundo and go like, "Hey, who wants to join me?"
Yeah.
So he took Soul Reapers and injected a whole bunch of hollow into them, and was just able to give them the ability, instead of ripping off their masks, they don masks, and that's what gives them like immeasurable buffs to their latent spirit energy, and gives them new ways in which to utilize that energy. But they're also just horribly broken in the process, because again, a whole lot of hollow where it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole fact where they were just outcast from Soul Society without Soul Society actually knowing the real events that happened, and just, shoot on sight policy for centuries. And we'll get to that.
Now there's another sub race which makes no sense, and that is a Quincy Arrancar. Now, those of you in the who are listening who actually paid attention to Bleach and are saying, "The hell's a Quincy Arrancar?" Most of us did too. But for clarification, a Quincy Arrancar is another artificial construct created by the Vandenreich, Yawok's goons, in the last arc of Bleach. And it's kind of as she wrote. It is an Arrancar that has been artificially granted Quincy powers, even though that doesn't make sense.
So the reason that doesn't make sense, and this probably would clarify a lot of things, due to the nature of Quincy's and the nature of hollows are pure poison to Quincy's, and I believe vice versa as well.
I don't think it's implied vice versa, but we can assume.
Probably. Yeah, but hollows and hollow energy and whatever has to do with hollows is pure poison to Quincy's. This has been on record, and this is why at least in the generations that we see current with like Uryu and Ichigo and stuff like that, it's been instilled that they are hollow hunters to with the express intent to kill, and they do so from a distance with their reishi bows, and so on and so forth. That's not exactly what a Quincy should be doing, as dictated by Yawok specifically, but that's the situation as we see it once we reach the generation that is current. They're
Like
hollow.
Yawok's probably down with the Hollow genocide.
He's probably down with the hollow genocide, but it's not, it's like, okay, that's a thing you can do. But yeah, just pure poison. Just a bit of biology we'd like to point out is just pure poison, and that's why
And because
the
of that,
concept of a Quincy Arankar doesn't make sense. Why'd you do it?
absolutely nonsensical. But we kind of have to acknowledge it from a distance because it exists.
Because it exists. Anyway,
all three. Two if you're being pedantic.
Yeah. So I believe that is the end of our docket. I'm checking our notes right now. We've already went through why Soul Reapers are not a race. We already discussed that, and that. We already discussed Vizards. I think that cuts it for today's episode, unless you want some to bring up something.
I believe that is everything that is pertinent for us to clarify going in. Now, we are going to be going off of the information that has been stated. If Kubo has provided information in some aspect, either in canon as an offhand statement or otherwise, we try our best to take these things into account. We do miss things. But this is our best understanding. And if we're wrong, then we're wrong. But this is the information we're using to move forward.
Yeah, if there's any sort of disconnect from here on out, we're just gonna have to take that on the chin, because we are taking this. This is the summation of all the knowledge that we know so far, and we will be operating with through to the end of the future. And
we're also pretending as though Burn the Witch didn't happen, because man, Burn the Witch doesn't make sense given what we know. But hey.
Also,
whatever.
man, Burn the Witch didn't happen.
Yeah.
It happened, but it didn't really happen.
Burn the Witch might as well have existed in its own universe for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, for all the 10 seconds that it even linked it back to normal Bleach anyway. But yeah, that's the knowledge that we're going to be using going forward. And if there's any inconsistencies from here on out, we're just going to take that. But that's it.
We're just gonna say sorry we were wrong and then move on.
Yeah, because we have some ideas, and you'll see those ideas next episode. Anyway, out.